I'm going to make this video for all you gear lusters out there. This is my home recording studio. I call it Riot Recording. And I'm going to cover a lot in a short period of time because I believe I only have 15 minutes that I could load up on YouTube. So we'll start with the drums. It's a Tama Art Star 2 Canadian hard maple. I think it's from the 80s, somewhere around there. On the inside of the kick, I have a Yamaha MZ204. On the outside of the kick, I have a Sony C38. Now this is the miking setup that I had for the last session that I did. And it varies, it changes depending on the band. The toms, Sennheiser 421 U5s. The snare drum top and bottom, I have SM57. On the hi-hat, I have a vintage Neumann KM84. That's from the old Wally Heider studios. The overheads, this is a stereo ribbon mic. This is an AEA R88. It's kind of hard to see, but that's a great microphone. You should look it up. And then I use some, I already broke them down, but I use room mics too. We'll keep going down the line of mics. Here is a Flea 47. This is a Neumann U47 clone. It's a great microphone, sounds really good. Here's an AKG C12 clone, the Flea 12. Got a great top end. Here's a classic mic. This is an AEA R44. It's got a huge low end. And this is basically a remake of the RCA 44 made by AEA. And this is just a standard U87, again from Heider Studio. I'm not a collector, I just ended up with quite a bit of his gear. And this is my rack here, I'll get to that in a minute. I'm gonna go to my mixer first. I mix in the box, I mix out of the box, I mix hybrid. It all depends on the sound I'm going for. This is an Inward Connections Mix 690. My mix bus compressor is a Brute 2. And this is a master section, also made by Inward Connections. It's got 3 different inputs. It's got 3 different speaker outputs, a sub, mono for check and phase, talkback, auxiliary, big monitor control. It's just a great piece. Makes it more console-like. So that's my mixer. I'm going through the Burl mothership. And it's a great converter. I had the Apogee AD-DA 16X series for like 16 years. And it was they're great converters, but when I moved to this, it was like night and day difference. This thing just sounds amazing. The preamps, we'll go down to preamps. So the mics you've seen on the drums, I basically use, these are 10 vintage API 312s. These are from Wally Heider's Studio 4 console. The only difference between this and a regular vintage API 312 is the input transformer. Frank DiMedio designed, it's a larger input transformer. And I have inside kick, outside kick, snare top, snare bottom, tom, floor tom, overhead left and right. That was the R88, the stereo ribbon mic, room left and room right. And those, so basically all my drums went through API 312s. And then we'll come over here. This is a great preamp. These are from the 50s or 60s. This is a Telefunken V72. I love them on guitars. It's a dark preamp. It's good for vocals too if you got the right mic with it. It's a very dark preamp. I bought this from Ocean Way Studio, Alan Sides, and when I got it, 3 days afterwards, I flipped over, and on the bottom there's a tag. Apparently he bought it from Wally Heider's Studio. Actually, he bought out Wally Heider's Studio, so he has a bunch of Heider gear as well. Great preamp. There's a pair of them there. Next up the line, Neve 1073s. These are vintage. Everyone knows about these. It's a classic. They sound great. I use them for vocals, or at least I did on the last mix. Up here, Kelrec 1161. This is a BBC design. It's probably one of the best EQs I have in my studio. I just love it. This is a preamp and EQ, a pair of them, and they're good for everything. I use them on guitars a lot because I love that EQ. Go down the list of other EQs. These are API 550s, not 550As. These are the original, very first made vintage API EQs. 4 550Bs. These are just regular standard API 550Bs that you could get from API right now. Great EQ, great for tracking, great for mixing. A pair of 550As. These are not just standard 550As that you could get right now. These are actually hand wired like the older ones. Here is another vintage 550 and an Avita Z27. Compressors, go down the line here. DBX 160 XTs. Right now I'm using them for kick and snare. It varies. I change things out a lot from project to project. But for this project, I'm doing kick and snare. It's like an 80s rock type band and it's working out. Next up the line, Chandler Germaniums. I'm using these for guitar, main rhythm guitars left and right. Great compressor. I love the fact that it has a wet-dry option. It's basically parallel compression without wasting channels. Very good compressor. It takes some getting used to, but it's a very good compressor. Got a pair of those. Next up the line, pair of distressors. This is the Swiss Army knife of compressor, and they sound pretty much good on everything. Right now I'm using, the bottom one is on bass guitar, and the top one is on lead vocals. I'm in mixed mode right now, so that's what I'm using that for. A FATSO. This stands for Fully Analog Tape Simulator or something like that. I can tell you one thing, it doesn't sound anything like tape, but it does sound good. So don't go purchasing it thinking you're going to sound like analog tape, because it's not going to sound like it. I'm using that for backup vocals right now. I might have, 8 to 12 backup vocals, but I sum down to 2 channels, come through this, and then I go into 2 channels of my mixer, if I'm mixing out of the box. Next up, an API 2500. I originally bought this for a mixed bus compressor, but ended up putting on my drum bus, and I love it on the drum bus. It's been there ever since. Great compressor. And what I have going on here, let me show you this last compressor first. This is a DBX 160 VU. It's a classic compressor. It's great for kick and snare. Good for a lot of things. Right now I'm using it for solo 1 and solo 2, which is basically, this isn't a solo track, it's basically just a melody track, but I'm calling it solo 1 and solo 2 to make my life easier. What I have going on here is for kick and snare, I have going through kick and snare, these 2 EQs. Toms are just no compression, it's got 550s on it. Overhead left and right, no compression, just 550s. Guitar solo, so guitar solo 1 going through the DBX 160 VU, going through the 550B. The right channel going through another 550B. My Chandler Germaniums for my guitar tracks are going through these 2 550As. My bass guitar is going through this vintage 550. My lead vocals is going through the Avita Z27. And my API 2500 drum bus is going through a pair of 550Bs. This is Vintage Gates Stay Level. I bought this from an old farmer that used to run a one-manned radio station way back when. I guess they used to put the whole program through it. It sounds really good. This is like a workhorse compressor. It's just loaded with tubes and big transformers. Sounds really good. Right now I'm using it for basically the mix that I'm doing. I'm also doing a mono mix, and then I'm going to take the mono mix, run it through here, and I'm going to tuck it underneath the other mix. It's just a test. I don't know if I'm going to use it, but if it gives me something that I want out of it, I will end up using it. That's a great compressor. Retro makes a clone of it. I heard it's really good, but I never actually heard it. And all this gear is patched through this patch bay here. That is Switchcraft 9625. Makes my life a lot easier. I'm running Pro Tools 11. I think it's 11, whatever the latest one is. Here's a couple mics I laid out. AKG 451Es, and then I wanted to show you guys these for some cheap alternatives, but they don't sound cheap. They're really good mics. This is an Audio-Technica 4050. You get it used for around 350 bucks. This is an Audio-Technica P37, and I tried it on a lot of things, but it is a great snare drum mic. Use this on a snare drum, you don't got to really do too much EQ to it. It's a great mic. You get it for around 50 to 80 bucks. And then the last one I wanted to show you, these are deal mics, low budget deal mics. This is a vintage AKG D1000E, And this is basically a vintage AKG that you get from around $50 to $75 on eBay, and it's a great mic. Think of it as a Shure SM57, but a little better. I got some more mics in here, but I'm not going to go through them all. Beyer M201, Royer R22. I'll show you my ISO room. I'm a big ribbon mic guy. I love ribbon mics. So here on guitar, I got a Royer R121. On this cab down here, I got a Royer R101. Both great mics, but very different. This seems like it's EQ'd for guitar more. I think it takes a higher SPL level, or can handle a higher SPL level. And the Royer 121, I feel like you could use it on more things. The R101, to me, I tried it on a couple different things, and it really only sounds good on guitar to me, at least for the type of music I'm doing. But the Royer 121, you could use on a lot of things. It's got a fluffier bottom end, where that seems like it's almost voiced for guitar. Again, both ribbon mics. Beyer M160, this is a dual ribbon element on a vintage Mesa cab. And then up here, another Sennheiser 421 U5. On the bass amp, I have a vintage AKG D20. Go down my amps here. This is a cool amp, another great deal. You can get it for like 75 bucks. It's just a tube amp with a gain knob. It breaks up the more you raise the level. I use it for bass guitars sometimes. Yamaha Soldano designed Yamaha T100. It's a great all-around studio amp. A tiny tier. I don't use that for recording. I just use it for live. JCM 900. I'd love to have an 800 sooner than later, but we'll see. Mesa single rectifier, and Fender Bassman. Now, the crazy thing about Bassmans is this is a vintage Bassman. I've played like 5 or 6 of them. Some break up, some don't. This one does. Breaks up in a dirty way. Here is 1978 Fender Stratocaster. And here is a 1978 Silverburst Les Paul Custom. Smooth as butter. This room here, I have conditioning behind this flag, and you don't see it, but behind the drapes is conditioning. This room here, it's approximately 12 by 24 foot. I have clouds for the ceiling and other conditioning on the ceiling. The whole back wall I made as a diffuser. I built those 2 diffusers right there. And then I got bass traps that I have put up.